Hello. I've been putting this story off for a long time. This was the story I was working on before life exploded in September. The story is one of those that just makes me angry. And the press loved this guy. Ugh. William Edward Hickman, December 20th, 1927, in Los Angeles, would be identified as the kidnapper and murderer of a 12-year-old girl named Marion Parker. Early on, a couple, allegedly named Andrew Kramer and June Dunning, is suspected of being Hickman's accomplices and are being looked for desperately. Hickman is said to be 18 or 19, graduate of Kansas City High School, and a former bank messenger. The motive? Revenge. Young Marion's father, Perry Parker, was the owner of that bank Hickman worked at, which was the Los Angeles First National Bank. Mr. Parker had dismissed Hickman after Hickman had confessed to the forgery of 30 to 40 small checks, wanting the money to get a motorcycle. Hickman would only get probation for all of his criming. He was a juvenile at the time. Mr. Parker wasn't happy about this lack of punishment, though other bank officials wanted leniency for Hickman because he was the only financial provider for his sister. He does have other family, a ma, uncle, etc., but I guess he was the only one able to provide. Well, Hickman wasn't happy about Mr. Parker's attitude. He got the probation, sure, but he wasn't happy that Mr. Parker had wanted more. And as the months passed, he got angrier. Remember the Incredible Hulk, the one from the 70s? You won't like me when I'm angry? So what did Hickman do when he got angry? Hickman, who had returned to Kansas City, stole a car from there and drove it to Los Angeles. At some point, the premeditated point, he had picked Marion out of the available Parker children, not wanting the younger one, for example, because more difficult to keep quiet. He went to Marion's school on December 15th, 1927, and told her teachers that her father had been injured, and he was going to take Marion to her father. He took Marion out from her school and into a car. He started calling and sending telegrams to Mr. Parker, telling Parker that Marion would be killed if Parker didn't give him $1,500 as ransom. 2 days later, Hickman received the $1,500 from Mr. Parker. He drove down a block and dumped Marion's torso out of the car onto the curb by the Parker house. Later that day, other packages were found in a nearby park, the dismembered parts of the rest of Marion's body. How did they know it was Hickman? Marion's teacher positively identified him. Fingerprints found at the various scenes and on the evidence were compared to his. Hickman began passing the marked money from his ransom haul. A filling station attendant had put gas in a blue Cadillac coupe, and then the driver also asked for a bulb for his car's headlight. When the attendant went into the station to get the bulb, the blue coupe took off. Ward, the station attendant, jumped into his own car and hauled after Hickman since the car got gas without paying. Unfortunately, the coupe was just faster than Ward, so Ward headed to the police station. He was shown pics of Hickman, and Ward identified the getaway driver as Hickman. With that, the police sped off and headed in the direction that Hickman may have gone. Hickman made sure to tell people later he didn't just throw the body onto the curb. Sure, that makes a difference. Apparently, the Bellevue apartment complex that Hickman lived in had been searched, and he was actually there and spoke with one of the inspectors. But Hickman left for San Francisco, stopped 3 times on the trip by officers, but was let go each time. San Fran is where he said he was supposed to meet up with Andy Kramer, whom Hickman said is the one that actually killed Marion Parker. However, no Kramer. Hickman continued north to Seattle, but then because of weather, he doubled back. His media nickname? The Fox. Oh dear. Now, I would say that given this period of time, this is because he's elusive and whatnot, not because he's considered to be attractive. Awards for his arrest and conviction are upwards of $100,000 in 1927 terms, which is incredible. Marion, doctors could not even tell her manner of death. Her body was so horribly mutilated. Hickman was caught in Oregon near Pendleton on December 22nd, a couple of days after the murder, and made a confession, but only to the kidnapping. And normally I would bring this confession to you, at least in part, but I'm not going to. I'll tell you why in a little bit. A worker at a Seattle clothing store told police that a young man of his description had spent one of the $20 gold certificates from the ransom at the store. The police tracked him from Seattle to Portland to Pendleton. Along the way, more of the ransom money was located. Hickman, when stopped in his car for arrest and the ransom money found, smiled, lit a cigarette, and told the police to, quote, do their stuff. You know what he was worried about? That he wouldn't get the front page notoriety of famed killers Leopold and Loeb. The other concern? That religion was being forced on him. Of the $1,500 ransom he collected, he still had $1,400 of it on him. Officers don't believe there was anyone helping him at all. If there was, and things were squared between he and his posse, he would have split that money already with the co-conspirators in order to keep his own head on his shoulders, if you know what I mean. Hickman's already self-aware that he will probably be hung for his crime, but before we get to that, which will be a while, kids, he wants to meet with Mr. Parker. Quote, I want to meet him face to face and tell him I didn't kill her, end quote, he exclaimed almost fiercely. Then, quote, if that girl only were alive, I'd be willing to die. You know, Parker was the best friend I ever had, end quote, the youth confided to his jailer. Oh, don't feel bad for him. He believed his ransom letters to Parker were considered, quote, great masterpieces of literature, end quote. He's being taken back to Los Angeles from Oregon. And the story about him having two accomplices are already being poo-pooed. As said, the fact that $1,400 of the $1,500 blood money exacted from Mr. Parker, father of the victim, was still in the kidnapper's possession at the time of his capture, eliminated the statement that he had contemplated sharing the ransom with a Confederate, officer said. Quote, Crooknum doesn't work that way, end quote, a grizzled officer added. Quote, when a pair or more of gangsters pull a job that entails cash, they split without delay. Hickman's notes carry the ego of individual power, and his gesture that his companions failed to meet him as scheduled at San Francisco appears nothing more than a struggle to draw himself out of the shadow of the gallows, end quote. Grand jury, hop, skip, jump, has quickly indicted Hickman, as Mr. Parker had to relive to them the moment he had to pick up the partial body of his dead daughter off of the curb. Hickman's ma, shocked, and of course in disbelief that her baby boy could have done such a thing. December 24th. Well, we got the head shrinkers in. I mean, no offense. I was a psych major in college. Anyway, Dr. Paul Bowers would say about Hickman, quote, it is apparent that the fox is a sadist, that type of criminal whose sole enjoyment consists of inflicting pain. My observations are hypothetical, because I have no real foundation for my opinion until I have examined the man physically, neurologically, and psychiatrically, end quote. Well, Dr. Bowers, I'm going to stop you there then for your not fact-based hypothetical, though he did go on for a bit. So we got 3 Kramer brothers, good Lord, in jail, and their alibis are being looked into, because Hickman said that one of them in particular was the one that actually killed Marion. Oh, well, 2 of the brothers were already in jail at the time of the murder, so they were too busy. The third, the one actually accused by Hickman, has an alibi. June Dunning, the other alleged conspirator, still not located. Evidence in Hickman's apartment is pointing more towards him being the only criminal here. That's what the police basically always thought. But again, dot those I's, cross those T's, just to say now to save your anticipation. Hickman would later say he had no accomplices. Evidence to him being the sole crimer? Part of Marion's body had been wrapped in a newspaper. A page of the bloodstained newspaper, the same newspaper, was found in his apartment. Strands of her hair had been found on a dresser in the apartment. A large butcher knife was found. December 27th. Hickman, on his return back to LA after being seized, finally decided to tell the truth. So in lieu of giving you his fake confession before, here is part of this one. He goes on for a bit, but here are the main things. In November, he had decided to kidnap a girl and ransom her so he could get money to go to college. He had thought about someone else entirely, but then decided on Mr. Parker, remembering that he had 2 daughters that had come into the bank to visit their dad. December 14th, he saw Marion riding her bike. December 15th, he watched Mr. Parker drive away from the house, and he followed the 2 girls to school in his car. He didn't realize the 2 girls were twins, but he asked for the younger Parker girl, and the school got out Marion. And as Ari said, he worked for Mr. Parker, who was allegedly hurt in a car accident, and he needed to get her. Now, why wouldn't the school wonder why the other daughter, Marion's twin, wasn't also needed? Anyway, it doesn't matter, because Marion was then in Hickman's clutches. He would say, quote, "They let her go, and I put her in the car, and we drove first to Glendale. There I told her of my deceit, but said I would have to hold her until I got $1,500 from her father. She didn't cry or fight or anything, and I didn't have to tie her after she said she'd be quiet. I warned her she would be hurt if she didn't do as I said, and I showed her my gun. Then we drove to the main post office." End quote. He talks about some back and forth here. At the post office, he sent off his first letter to Mr. Parker. Then he went to Western Union and sent a telegram to Mr. Parker. More driving, and then he sent a second telegram. Then he took Marion to a movie. Then they came back to LA. They went to his building. Quote, "I told Marion my apartment was on the 3rd floor and she would have to follow upstairs behind me and be quiet. She did. No one saw us go in. Marion slept on the couch that night with only her shoes off, and I put a heavy blanket over her. I lay awake a long time looking at her." End quote. Creeper. He tried to make her breakfast. She cried too much to eat. To quiet her, he told her she could write a note to her pa. Hickman then tied her to a chair and left to go to mail a letter to her father with her note in it. He came back and showed her how her name was in the newspapers. Then there was more driving around, which she apparently liked. He tried to call Mr. Parker a couple of times, got him the second time. Quote, "I called him again from Pico and Wilton Streets from another drugstore and made a date to meet him on Gramercy Street. Marion and I saw Mr. Parker drive past in his car, but I got frightened when I saw 2 other cars that I thought were filled with detectives, and I drove away." End quote. When I read this, and then read what I'm about to read to you, God, you just think to yourself, could she have been safe at that point? Would he have exchanged her for the money and she would have been back home? If Hickman hadn't been paranoid, or if it was obvious those weren't cops. Anyway, quote, "On Friday night, Marion slept on the couch again. She woke up at 7 o'clock and I told her to write a note telling her father not to trap me. She didn't mind writing it. I tied Marion to a chair again, and this time I blindfolded her. Then, awfully sudden, I wanted to murder her. I got a rolling pin from the kitchen. And then I changed my mind. I got a dish towel and put it around her neck, gently telling her it would make her head rest easier. Then I suddenly pulled it tight with all my strength. She didn't make any audible sound." End quote. I'm going to stop there. He gets graphic. Basically, he removed her clothing, put her body in the tub, and dismembered her. As mentioned at the beginning, some of her body parts were wrapped in newspapers separately. Her torso was put in a suitcase. Quote, then I wrote a final last chance letter, mailed it, and went to the theater. But I didn't enjoy the show much, and I cried. I went home and got the suitcase and the packages and drove out to the park and threw away the packages. Packages are her body, just to remind you. Then I went back and made the date with Mr. Parker to meet me at 15th Street and Manhattan Place. When I saw his car, I tied a handkerchief over my face and drove alongside of him. I showed him my sawed-off shotgun and warned him. He said he had the money, and I told him Marion was sleeping. Then I took the money and drove a little ways and put the body on the fender so it rolled off on the parking strip. End quote. Then Hickman ate a, quote, hearty meal, end quote, using a bit of the ransom money. That was all on Saturday. Sunday morning, the cops had come to his apartment looking for towels. That night, Hickman robbed a man of $15, stole his car, heading north first to San Francisco. He claimed, quote, I didn't have any spirit of revenge towards Mr. Parker. I just wanted the money to go through college, end quote. Hickman has supposedly told DA Asa Keys that he's ready to plead guilty to first-degree murder and to accept the death penalty. Now, apparently, getting the now-seized Hickman back into L.A. is going to be tricky. I know. We've talked about his trip back to L.A. a few times now. He's in a train, and apparently as the train has stopped at a few points, attempts were made by angry bystanders to storm the prison car. Angry, cursing men in Oakland when the car had to be switched. Crowded around the car and tried to board, but were beaten back by prison guards. How many guards? Nearly 100 prison guards are on the train, which is insane. But that's how much they think an angry mob is going to do away with Hickman. Hell, let them. Sorry. Yes, justice should be properly served, but man, sometimes a little Wild West justice. No, sorry. And apparently at some of the stops, women were blowing kisses at him. Ladies, really? Actually, maybe they were blowing kisses at the men who had captured Hickman, who were also on the train. I'd rather believe that, the actual heroes here. It's been said that Hickman's lawyer will be a 25-year-old man named Jerome Walsh from Kansas City, secured by Hickman's ma, who says, quote, I do not believe that my son committed this murder unaided. I believe he was forced into making this confession from fear of violence, and he will repudiate it when he is safe. I can read between the lines that he has been handled in such a manner as to make him say things he really doesn't mean, end quote. So seems open and shut, right? Why is your video so long? Because kids, justice ain't always that simple, is it? December 28th. Hickman doesn't want a lawyer, doesn't want the advice of one. Why should he? He plans to plead guilty. Yep. Anyway, yes, he arrived in LA, and within 2 hours he was brought before Superior Judge Carlos Hardy for his indictments. Regardless of Hickman's wants, the case is holding still until Attorney Walsh arrives from Kansas City. The jail? Not feeling good about having Hickman under their watch. 1, for the possibility of him taking his own life. 2, for possible violence from other prisoners who appear to be fashioning weapons out of broomsticks. Yes, I'm really trying hard not to root for vigilante justice. Oddly, County Autopsy Surgeon Wagner told Coroner Nance that he thinks Marion died of fright, that her heart had stopped when Hickman had placed the towel around her neck. So what you want? Well, Hickman wants 3 things. He wants to talk to Marion's father to ask for forgiveness. He wants to hear from his mother. And he wants a fair trial. You want to know what else he said? Quote, I have already paid many times for my crime. End quote. Oh, shut up, you twit. He wants to know if he's getting as much publicity in LA as he was in Oregon. Women are writing letters to the jail to offer to pray for Hickman. Ladies, please. And we're finding out how the detectives broke Hickman on the trip to LA. At every station they stopped at, they would spot a little girl and would point her out to Hickman. Quote, look at that little girl, end quote. Then they brought in the big guns. Chief Klein, who told Hickman he had 5 minutes to sort himself out, and then he was going to talk. And Hickman did. Now, he tried to bring the accomplices on board again. DA and chiefs weren't having it. And then he vomited up his story and told of his whole criminal history, filling 19 pages worth of text. December 29th, 1927. Hickman, in addition to some 50 holdups and robberies he's confessed to, has confessed openly and without prompting that on Christmas Eve 1926, he shot and killed C. Ivy Toms, a druggist gentleman, during a holdup. At that murder, he was assisted by a young man named Welby Hunt. Hunt was arrested on this particular day and confessed to his part in the gun battle that had evolved from the holdup, showing off 2 bullet wounds he had received to his shoulder. Hunt is not believed to have had anything to do with Marion's kidnapping and/or murder. I'm not going to get a lot into the Tom's murder as of right now, unless something major happens with it. Oh, and also, Hunt's grandfather mysteriously died, and Hunt and Hickman both lived with him at one point. And Hickman confessed he had started to dismember Marion while she was still alive. Dr. Cecil Reynolds, psychiatrist, believes, quote, I understand Hickman a cold-blooded monster in full possession of his faculties, which are above the average of a human being of the same age and station. End quote. December 30th. D.A. Asa Keys has asked for a new grand jury investigation to Hickman, primarily to look into the Christmas Eve 1926 murder of C. Ivy Toms. Both Hickman and Hunt had confessed to the holdup at the pharmacy, which culminated in the shootout and death of Toms. Hickman said he was the one that had made the killing shot, which is in line with Hunt saying yes to the robbery, but no to the murder. And there's possibly more. The other mysterious death I briefly alluded to, Abner Driscoll, age 60, and grandfather of Hunt. Both Hunt and Hickman had lived with Hunt's grandfather at some point. Driscoll had been found dead May 25th, 1927, below the Arroyo Seco bridge near Pasadena. At that time, police said it was a suicide. Driscoll had reportedly gone to a bank where Hunt and Hickman, both were messengers, had withdrawn a lot of money. On the same day, he was found dead, and there was no money on his body. A note was found in his pocket, a so-called suicide note, which was given to his widow. Police didn't bother to check the handwriting, and there were no further inquiries into Driscoll's death. Jerome Walsh, Hickman's attorney, would say, quote, in the most impersonal manner that I can humanly express it, I desire to state that I came to Los Angeles as the personal and legal representative of an indescribably broken-hearted and crushed mother, but utterly unable with the beauty of a mother's faith to comprehend her son's guilt. Clinging unflinchingly to the bare hope, too, that there must be some extenuating circumstances mitigating her boy's culpability in this agonizing situation. End quote. December 31st. Tangled webs. We've seen plenty of those. Hickman's robber bestie, Welby Hunt, had long admitted to being part of the holdup, but not the shooter of Ivy Toms. Well, police now think Hunt was the murderer of the druggist because Hunt was carrying a .38 automatic pistol. Hickman had confessed to carrying a .32 caliber gun. Toms, the druggist, killed by a .38 caliber bullet. And Hickman has once again changed his confession of the murder of Marion Parker. He said that he feared she would mess up his plans to obtain the reward ransom if she were allowed to live. This is in contrast to what he previously said, at some point I've lost track, was that he had killed Marion because he just wanted to kill. Hickman's attorney, Walsh, has declared that Hickman's plea will be insanity. Hickman is also throwing Hunt under the murder bus in the death of Ivy Toms, and apparently Hunt has gathered himself up an attorney, but Hunt is mere 16 years old, and regardless of what happens, would not get the death penalty because of his age. January 4th, 1928. Hickman officially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and then Attorney Walsh asked for time to prepare for the insanity defense. Judge Hardy said by law, Hickman had to be brought to trial within 30 days. So, you know how Hickman wanted to be like Leopold and Loeb? The two famed killers of young Bobby Franks also pleaded guilty by reason of insanity. And 100 years later, spoiler alert, it saved them from being hanged for their crimes. Of course, they also had famous lawyer Clarence representing them. Would Hickman benefit from this plea like Leopold and Loeb did? January 5th, Hickman and Hunt were brought before a grand jury regarding the robbery and death of druggist Ivy Toms. Hickman would tell the whole story. Hunt refused to testify, and now Hunt is claiming innocence in all matters. I can't tell in this article what really happened with that, but I'm assuming both men will have murder charges for this case. January 16th, alienists, those psychiatrists and psychologists who work more with the law, were ordered by both parties to conduct an analysis of Hickman and his sanity. The defense, because of the insanity plea, had the burden of proving him insane. The prosecution hopes to show him sane and send him to the gallows. January 17th. So Hickman is playing games with the alienists. One Dr. Shelton entered Hickman's cell to retrieve a document from Hickman about his motives for the crime. Hickman held up the paper and tossed a coin to see if he was going to give that paper to the alienist. He did not, and the alienist left without the motive statement. One Dr. Michaels had given Hickman a questionnaire to fill out. Hickman had finished it, but then he leaped to his feet and tore up the document. Dr. Michaels picked up the torn document and plans to puzzle it back together. But by the next day, he seems to be working with the alienist, and all is merry and bright. January 25th. Trial begins today for Marion's murder. Hickman's pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. He claims he was crazy and didn't know the difference between right and wrong. In this case, again, the defense has the burden of proof, not the prosecution, because all people are considered to be sane. Defense will open the trial. Again, different from the norm. Hickman's family is here for him, including his father who divorced Hickman's mother many years ago and lives elsewhere. Hickman's older brother has left his studies in Kansas to be in L.A. Marion's father, Mr. Parker, will be the primary accuser. Marion's mother, sister, and her older brother have been excused from having to testify or attend the trial. If the jury agrees he's insane, he'll be taken to an insane asylum, and at the end of a year's time, he can be reassessed once he asks for a new insanity trial. If he's sane, he'll be set free. We've got a gaggle of alienists from both sides ready to duke it out in court. Now, I have to quote this article's writer for the Washington Times, January 25th, 1928, Ernestine Ball. Quote, "Dead whitefish. You've seen the flabby greenish underside of a dead whitefish thrown to the surface by some swift undercurrent that seems to be spraying the putrid fish from the sparkling living waters. That's what Edward Hickman made me think of. In one breath, he says he can feel the hangman's noose. In the next, he says, quote, 'I wish the doctors would find out what's wrong with me,' end quote. He is evidently toying with the insanity idea. He gets small comfort on that score from this interviewer," end quote. A family friend of Marion's family would speak to Ms. Ball. Quote, "What the Parker family feels is a society under the laws of the state of California should demand that Hickman be given the maximum penalty. But, you see, the Parkers don't want folks to get the idea that they are going to be emotionally compensated for the murder of Marion when Hickman is disposed. They are not emotionally wallowing out in that stricken home in schemes of personal vengeance against the slayer of Marion. They are all lost in the fog of personal grief, heartache, misery. The little girl that they loved done to death by a 19-year-old criminal. But you can't rid them of their loss, their sorrow. That's the Parker family attitude," end quote. And then the hoopla. Judge Hardy recused himself. Defense attorney Walsh turned over an affidavit that said Judge Hardy was prejudiced. Judge Hardy, in order to keep this case moving, stepped off the bench, though he said he denied that he felt biased or prejudiced against Hickman. So now we have Judge Tribuco. And now we also need to get a jury together. And the defense wants the jury to be all super smart people. In the courtroom, the press got most of the seats, leaving few for the general public, so most of the public was milling about the hallways and outside, barricades and guards keeping everyone on the straight and narrow. January 27th, still doing jury stuff. Once again, International News Service reporter Ernestine Ball provides some tea about trial fans. Quote, a wealthy, well-dressed woman offered me $20 today for the use of my press pass to the Hickman trial. I figure that she belongs to the satin-lined class because she invited me up to her suite, not one room and bath, in an expensive hotel to talk it over. Refusal, waving away a higher price, brought this. I'm just dying to get in. Won't you please help me? Her double chin wobbled with emotion. Then she wound up with, I just hate to go back to Chicago and admit to my friends that I didn't get into court. I saw Loeb and Leopold 5 times. I've met murder fans in my days of reporting, but never such a priceless specimen as this. End quote. Reporter Ernestine reveals that it was Hickman who started signing his name as The Fox. January 28th, we've got our jury. 3 women and 9 men, although they aren't sworn in yet. Alternates have not been picked yet. And good night, the newspaper published their names in a group picture. Yeah, things were different back then. January 29th, the defense has in their possession 37 affidavits that Hickman is insane. Apparently, defense is going down the dark path of saying that there was some hereditary insanity, going back 3 generations of the family. His poor dead grandmother has had someone or someone's in Arkansas provide a disposition that she was insane. Hickman's mother, Eva, is going to testify that she was also institutionalized at some point. Young friends and school chums of Hickman are going to say that his actions as a youngster were a little, or perhaps a lot, off-kilter. January 31st. So now we're hearing the depositions, or in-person testimony, of those defense witnesses here to say that Hickman and his family's elevator don't go all the way to the top. Remember, this is the defense's burden to prove. His mother is not only to testify, but is being testified about. How witnesses would talk about how she stood over her husband with a butcher knife while he was in bed. How she danced through the house while making beds. Knife aside, that doesn't sound crazy at all. It sounds like getting through your freaking chores with 5 kids and your husband ran off on you. How even when she was working in the cotton fields or going to run errands, she would take her 5 kids with her. Well, her husband's either with other women or he's left by this point. She's got to work. How she had tried to allegedly end her life taking carbolic acid. How she allegedly threatened to end her children's lives. That though normal physically, she was subnormal mentally. That Hickman's grandmother, Becky Buck, had a weak mind. That she'd get it into her head that everybody was against her. She was nervous and would have crying spells. So Judge Tribuco has let everyone know what the law in California is as it relates to the insanity plea. Grab a snack. Quote, insanity means such a diseased and deranged condition of the mental faculties as to render the person incapable of distinguishing between right and wrong in relation to the act with which he is charged. An irresistible impulse to commit an act which a party knows to be wrong and unlawful, if it ever exists, does not constitute the insanity which is a legal defense. The standard of accountability is this. Had the party sufficient mental capacity to appreciate the character and quality of the act? Did he know and understand that it was a violation of the rights of another and in itself wrong? If he had the capacity thus to appreciate the character and comprehend the possible or probable consequences of his act, he is responsible to the law for the act thus committed and is to be judged accordingly. Although it is true that generally the burden of proof is upon the prosecution, yet to this rule there is this exception, where insanity is relied upon as a defense. the burden of proving the existence of such insanity is on the defendant, and it is incumbent upon him to establish by preponderance of evidence that he was insane at the time of committing the act charged." End quote. February 1st. So if the Marion Parker murder insanity trial wasn't enough, Hickman and Hunt are also going to be in trial for the holdup and murder of C. Ivy Toms. Hickman has entered 2 pleas, not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. Hunt pleads not guilty. Well, because we've already got one Hickman trial underway, the Toms druggist murder trial will be delayed until the Marion Parker murder trial is over. February 2nd. Mrs. Hickman never did take the stand when she had intended. The defense is apparently strategizing and held her off. Instead, the defense is going to tell of Hickman's confession. Wait, which one? I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but here are the ones related to insanity. Hickman at one of the early confessions, quote, "For several years I have had a peculiar complex. Even though my habits have always been clean, and although my school record is commendable, I have had an uncontrollable desire to commit a great crime. This peculiar feeling, and I believe that it borders on the edge of insanity, or that it comes as a weird relief from seriousness or deep thought, found a means of expressing itself in the Parker case. However, I do not believe that I am insane or crazy, yet I do think that this complex of mine should not be considered least among my motives in this crime." End quote. His other motives he names were to secure expenses so he could go to college, and that he doesn't consider crime seriously enough, that if he wants something, he will do whatever he needs to get it. He says that Marion's murder was not for revenge against her father, Perry Parker. He killed her with the intention of evading suspicion and arrest. He said that he did not do anything to Marion beyond the murder, which had been very vaguely insinuated in the papers, and that basically he had killed her, quote, "so suddenly and unexpectedly that she never had a thought or fear of death." End quote. February 3rd. Jurors had to review the pictures of Marion's body after it was discovered. And remember, she had been dismembered. They also saw pictures of the knife the murder was committed with. Mrs. Hickman took the stand to speak of how her unhappy marriage made her hate her husband and no longer live on this earth. How Hickman's brother, Alfred, said that his brother had to have been insane to do what he did to Marion Parker. That their home conditions growing up were not that of a normal family, that their father had left when he was 13, that their mother wasn't always right. Mr. Hickman would tell how his wife told him that someday he'd find all of the children murdered. Famed Tarzan author Edgar Rice Burroughs has been in the courtroom, seems most days if not all days, and has contributed articles about the trial, not as a reporter, but as an observer, about the jury observing the photos of Marion's condition post-murder. And remember that not all states allowed women to be on juries, and 3 women are on this jury. Quote, "There may be 10,000 cogent reasons why women should serve on juries, but the effect of those horrible photographs upon the women members of the Hickman jury nullify them all. Those women will never forget what they saw. Upon some of them, it may make such a lasting impression as to affect their entire future lives, and thus the ramifications of Hickman's hideous, wanton crime multiply and extend, bringing pain and sorrow, a cancerous growth that not even the knife can now eradicate." End quote. February 4th. Defense rested its case, Hickman himself not on the stand. Now it's the prosecution's turn, starting with the gaggle of alienists. One Dr. Reynolds believed that Hickman had willed the crime, that the kidnapping was deliberate. And when he realized what could happen with Marion, quote, "confronted with this problem, Hickman solved it in the most logical manner indicated by his profession of hold-up man and murderer." End quote. And guess what else the court heard? J. Clark Sellers, microscopic and handwriting expert, testified to a letter that was written by Hickman and given to another prisoner. Quote, "Lester Dale, I believe you and believe I can trust you." Oops. "Give me your advice on which one of these plans would be better. All of these depositions aren't enough to prove me insane. I've got to throw a fit in court, and I intend to throw a laughing, screaming, blank act before the prosecution finishes their case, maybe in front of old man Parker himself." Really? Jerk. Then to bewilder the jury before the case is ended, I'll get up and ask the judge if I can say something without my attorney butting in. Then I'll get up and give all of that about me wanting to do some good by living. I intend to blank Mr. Keyes before the thing's over and pull some trick on him in the crazy line. Blank, think these things over and tell me whether it is best or not. For God's sake, tear this thing up because it would ruin me if it got out. Oops. See you in the morning. William Edward Hickman, alias the Fox. Ha, ha, ha. P.S. You know, and I know that I'm not insane, however. End quote. Sorry, the blanks are not bad words or anything like that. It's that I am literally reading the newspaper copy of the letter. And though I can read cursive very well, not everybody writes cursive very well. February 6th. So this was weird, but apparently when a defense alienist was testifying, he had Hickman stand before the jury shirtless, and they used a device to mark him in the skin, and said that dermatographia is a symptom of dementia praecox, quote, on account of the frequency of endocrine disturbances in this disease, end quote. Dr. Bowers, in contention of that, drew an H on the chest of Hickman and said that this was not dermatographia. If it was, it would have produced a welt rather than just red marking. Dr. Bowers would say, quote, one nut does not make a machine. Neither does a top in a set of tires make an automobile, end quote. Indeed? February 8th, judge and jury are being threatened with violence pretty much regardless of what happens with this trial, depending on who you talk to. One threat said it would, quote, blow up the whole bunch, end quote, if Hickman got away with it, i.e. was declared insane. D.A. Keyes has been threatened if Hickman is convicted. Lord, people, just calm down. February 10th, so what do you think happened? He was declared sane. Was it a long deliberation? No. It took the jury 40 minutes to determine that he was sane when he kidnapped Marion, and he was sane when he murdered her. He'll be brought up soon for sentencing. It will either be death by hanging or life imprisonment, which will be up to Judge Trabuco on Hickman's degree of guilt, like first-degree murder, second-degree murder. Once Hickman is arraigned for sentencing, defense attorney Walsh will move for an appeal and for a new trial. It seems highly likely the request for appeal will be denied. Now, understand, this plea of not guilty by reason of insanity is new back in this time. Quote, the new law places only the question of sanity in the hands of the jury, leaving the determination of the degree of guilt up to the judge, end quote. I believe the defense wants to declare that's unconstitutional. February 13th, will Hickman have to go to a second trial with Buddy Welby Hunt for the murder of C. Ivy Tom's druggist? Defense attorney Walsh intends to ask for a delay due to his work on the Marion Parker murder case. You know, lots of murders happening. February 14th. Well, happy Valentine's Day. Hickman was sentenced to be hanged on April 27th. Judge Trabuco didn't sugarcoat anything, saying, quote, you shall suffer the penalty of death, and the Lord have mercy upon your soul, end quote. He had found Hickman guilty of murder in the first degree. For the kidnapping charges, he would receive life imprisonment at San Quentin. And as more of a Valentine's Day gift, he was also denied motion for a new trial. And then defense attorney Walsh entered an objection to the judge's jurisdiction in passing judgment on Hickman. That objection? Denied. Very quickly, though, Hickman got a stay of execution. Court denied appeal, resentenced August 9th. September 24th, Hickman has been confirmed into the Catholic faith. Well, better late than never, I guess. October 9th. 4 judges thus far have denied Attorney Walsh's request for a stay of execution. Why are they trying? Well, because of an odd California statute. Per the Washington Times, October 9th, 1928. Quote, this statute, one of the latest and most unusual dealing with attempts of murderers to secure freedom on insanity grounds, provides that when a defendant pleads guilty by reason of insanity and joins with it other pleas, he shall first be tried as if he had entered a plea of not guilty. and the question of insanity shall be decided separately. This statute, Attorney Walsh contended, was a denial of due process under the Constitution. End quote. October 16th. Here the defense attorneys are out trying to appeal to the governor. The warden said that he's already sent out the execution invites. If you think I'm being tacky, no. That's what the newspaper said. Quote, invitations to the execution, end quote, which was set for a Friday morning at 10 o'clock. San Quentin received thousands of requests, including from 12 women, to witness the hanging. Apparently, there is only room for 150, which is mostly officials and the media. October 18th, we're a day before the hanging. Hickman would say, quote, I'm not afraid to die. I'll go quietly to the top of the gallows and take my medicine. I've made it right with God, and this business of dying Friday morning is to me a privilege. It means the end. There is something peculiar about me, that crime, that Parker crime. I never could dope out why I did it. I did the whole thing by myself, too. All this talk about there being somebody else is pure bunk. End quote. His mother is unable to come to LA from Kansas City. Her health is not well. Attorney Walsh would make one last attempt to save him, armed with letters stating that Hickman was insane, but it was all for naught. Harry Parker would say, quote, if I were to say we could find it in our hearts to forgive the man, it would be an obvious lie. I hope there will be no further delays in the consummation of justice. Not because I am vindictive, but because I'm anxious to have it all finished. Maybe the years to come will bring back a little of our peace of mind. I hope so. End quote. I hope so too. Meanwhile, defense attorney Walsh has affidavits from a psychiatrist and plans to present them to Warden Holohan to have the warden request the DA appoint an insanity board. But the warden's already sent out the invites. Now, that is me being snarky. October 19th. Hickman got up at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, ironic considering how well he said he slept post-murder, and read the Bible and played his phonograph, the song In a Monastery Garden. His last meal? Grapefruit. He was concerned about his mother having to pay for his burial and was told by the warden that it wouldn't be that great of a burden. He read letters from his mother, then wrote a response at the bottom to mail back to her. He sent off several telegrams to the police of various cities, admitting the crimes he had committed there and asking for forgiveness. Father Fleming at San Quentin, who has seen more than his share of hangings, would say that he'd never seen anyone as strangely unconcerned as Hickman, and he was hanged without much ceremony. His lawyer, who still oddly claims that he's really Hickman's mother's lawyer, would say that he had been threatened with death unless he had quit trying to save Hickman, but believes if Hickman's family had the wealth like Leopold and Loeb, he wouldn't have been hanged. That does seem to be a problem sometimes, even now. So I didn't go over this, but what happened with Welby Hunt? Well, in the end, both he and Hickman went to trial and were found guilty of the murder of C. Ivy Toms and would get sentenced to life imprisonment. The jury deliberated for over 2.5 hours and then were locked up for the night without having reached a verdict, until it was finally reached March 10th, 1928. Supposedly, later after that was all over, Hickman had told a prison guard that he, not Hunt, was the one that had actually killed Mr. Toms. Whether that was true or not did not seem to do anything for Hunt, according to the newspapers, at least not right away. I had to go to the internet to learn that Hunt, who had been sentenced to life in prison, had been paroled in March 1939, so he had served about 11 years. So, what do you think? Hickman's petty thievery. Fine, I mean, not fine, but at least moderately understandable if he was the only working member of the family. He wanted a motorcycle, wanted to go to college, needed more money, but instead of sticking to holding up businesses, goes to ransom and murder. Was he insane? Just really desperate. I don't know, but Marion Parker was just a child who shouldn't have been killed so horrifically for it.